Dream Children, a Reverie by Charles Lamb is an essay, a very personal essay, in which Charles Lamb, one of the finest essays of English literature, tries to imagine what would have been life like if he had married his beloved, once upon a time. So towards the end of the essay, this is not revealed at the beginning of the essay. This is something which you come across only towards the end of the essay. So at the end of the essay, Charles Lamb, kind of reveals that it was only a reverie or a dream, and the children who he had been talking about all the while were also, dream children, or children who were born of dreams, and children who were not his own in reality. They are children who would have been. So Charles Lamb was in love with Anne Simmons, and he could not marry her, unfortunately. So this was actually a regret and a deep sorrow which he carried throughout his life. So this particular essay is written, in remembrance of Anne Simmons and what life would have been or had been if he had married Anne Simmons. So the very first part of the essay talks about how children love to listen to their elders, when they are children, and to their elders' stories about when they were children. And then Charles Lamb talks about their grandmother Field, how good and religious she was, and how when she died, many people came to attend the funeral. And then he talks about the mansion in which they lived, and how when Charles Lamb was a child, he used to imagine that ghosts would go up and down the railings in the mansion. And at this and the presence of the children are shown by such lines as at that particular point, little Alice's right foot played an involuntary movement. How he, when he talks about grandmother Field, he says, his grandmother, his mother and their grandmother Field was a great dancer in her youth, and then little Alice's feet, taps involuntarily. So that is how Charles Lamb actually brings in the image of two children who are listening to what he's trying to say. And then he speaks about how great grandmother Field also believed in an apparition of two infants who would come gliding up and down the great staircase. But she slept, and she always said that the innocent children would never do her any harm. But Charles Lamb was so frightened, and he would, rush to the maid, and would, sleep with her, because he used to grow so afraid of the apparition of the souls. He also believed what his mother used to say. Now again, John comes in. John is one of the dream children, and then John expands his eyebrows and he looks so surprised. So that is how the readers get an idea about these two children, a bit and bit, line by line, Charles Lamb introduces these two children. And then towards the end of the essay, he wakes up from the reverie and then declares that they were only dream children. And then he talks about the garden, the old-fashioned garden, which they almost had to themselves during the holidays, the yew trees, the firs, red berries, and everything, and the fishes that darted to and fro in the fish pond. And then he talks about his brother, and in real life also, Charles Lamb had a brother. His name was John Lamb, and here he uses the same name. He uses the name John L. So he was so handsome and spirited a youth, and a king to the rest of us. And instead of moping about in solitary corners, he would mount the most mettlesome horse he could get. when but an imp no bigger than themselves, and make it carry him half over the county in the morning, and join the hunters when there were any out. And yet he loved the old great house and gardens too, but he had too much spirit to be always pent up within their boundary. So he talks about how adventurous his brother was, and how he was in awe of him, how he loved him. But then he also talks about the tragedy, how he became, lame-footed in later life. And then he says that he kind of regrets, Charles Lamb regrets that he did not spend much time for his lame-footed brother, as he had taken care of Charles Lamb when he was young. Then there's a little bit of philosophy which comes in, where he talks about, the distance between life and death, and how, after his brother died, he thought he bore his death pretty well at first, but then later it haunted him like anything. And then he said he never cried, after his brother died, but he missed him. And it was only when he died that he knew how much he had loved him. And I missed his kindness, I missed his crossness, and wished him to be alive again, to be quarreling with him, for we quarrel sometimes, rather than not have him again, and was as uneasy without him as he, their poor uncle, must have been when the doctor took off his limb. Now, at this particular point, both the children, they start crying, and they tell Charles Lamb not to go on with the tragic story, but to say something very hopeful. And then he talks about their mother, the fair Alice W-N, who in reality was Anne Simmons. And he explains to him what coyness is, and how denial usually meant in maidens. And then when he looks at Alice, the young Alice, he sees the soul of the first Alice looking out of her eyes, and for a few moments he gets confused as if this is a mother or the daughter who's looking at him. And as I stood gazing, both the children gradually grew fainter to my view, receding and receding, till nothing at last but two mournful features were seen in the uttermost distance, which without speech strangely impressed upon me the effects of speech. So the two children, the apparition, they grow smaller and smaller, and then even without speaking, there was a kind of impression of a speech, which was, "We are not of Alice, nor of thee, nor are we children at all. The children of Alice call Bartram father, we are nothing, less than nothing, and dreams. We are only what might have been, and must wait upon the tedious shows of Lethe millions of ages before we have an existence and a name." And immediately Charles Lamb wakes up, and then he quietly, finds himself seated on his chair with his very faithful sister. Bridget is a name which is given here. Mary Lamb is the true name of his sister in true life. And he sees his sister Bridget unchanged by his side, but John L. or James Elias, or his deceased brother John Lamb, was gone forever.